social media, all the good things it could do. It's great, that's forethought, but we didn't put forethought into what if it gets out of control? How do you get this monster of misinformation back in the box?
Hi, this is Frank Schaeffer, and you are watching and or listening to my podcast, In Conversation with Frank Schaeffer. And today, my guest is Teresa Spangler, who is an author of a book called All That I Am, Now That I Know, Exploring Women and Entrepreneurship. And in addition to which, she is someone who has both studied and worked in artificial intelligence and decision-making. I met Teresa through the WBC, which is the Women's Business Collaborative. I was introduced to that by my friend Jose Zylstra, who runs a wonderful outfit called Gender Fair that assesses American corporations, well, global corporations based on how they treat women. And you can download it on your phone and make consumer decisions accordingly. And her friend, Edie Fraser, who runs WBC, I am on the advisory board now. I think 10% of the membership of the many hundreds of women involved are men, and I'm one of them. And so thanks to Edie, thanks to Jose for introducing us. So Teresa, let me just start with a little bit of personal stuff about you. I just want to mention that the last podcast we did, which will be out soon, was with Gabriela Schuster, who is a vice president of Microsoft and has been in tech for 30 years. So we've done two back-to-back women in a field that seems to me populated by far too many men and far too few women. As someone who's working with AI, I'm going to get into that with you. But before we get to the book and who you are professionally, you mentioned kind of joking about the background that, maybe your husband will walk through or whatever. And I said, dogs, children, husbands are welcome. And so we don't care. This is a conversation between human beings.
Awesome.
And we all have lives. So let me start with your life. I come from a evangelical fundamentalist background that taught me that women should obey men. I left that. I'm totally on the other side of these issues now, some 30, 40 years later, as I'm pushing into my 70s. Jeannie and I have been married 52 years. I got her pregnant when we were 17 and 18, and we stuck together. We have 3 kids and 5 grandchildren. And I always like to begin by just kind of being honest about my own life to let my guests know that, I'm old enough now, so I don't care if anybody thinks I'm cool or not. And I can just say, who I really am and the journey I was on. So let me start with you as a human being and just talk about your background a little bit. Tell me a little bit about where you grew up, who your parents were, what kind of people they were, what sort of childhood you had, and a little bit about your personal journey, whether it's business or spiritual or romantic, from there to where you're sitting this afternoon.
Excellent. Thank you, Frank. All right, well, let's see. I grew up in a very small town, Concord, North Carolina. I have 5 brothers. I was generally hanging from a door hinge by my belt loop, or I was the football. I've tossed around quite a bit. So I grew up with a lot of strength. I grew up with parents that were first generation, both sides from Lebanon. They immigrated to this country. So my parents were first generation born in this country, but I grew up with my grandmother and my grandparents being very influential in my life for the strength that they had to, when I look at what's going on today, they had to come out of war-torn countries and find peace somewhere and freedom. So, and fight for their own families. So I grew up with that as a basis. I can get into that a little bit more later, but my dad had a small business in Concord that he was sort of the do-all, real estate. He had a little store that my grandparents started when they came over, his parents, and he worked the store. When my grandfather died, he, took it over and kind of ran it. It was sort of this, all types of things inside the store, including cooking making sandwiches, serving, the community. It was always part of our life, right? We all went to the store, we helped him. He did real estate, he did taxes, and he had the store, and he put people to work, built homes, and, just had a passion for the community. It really was the community. We grew up, very strong Catholic family, lots of cousins and always got together. But I had I guess a very strong foundation. I think it was a spiritual foundation, if, in the beginning, but very strong grounding. My dad and my mom were very much about people and the community and supporting the community. And, even though they're both gone, people come up to me all the time and with the most incredible memories of where my parents helped them. So that drive to help is innate in me. The drive to want to give back and do things is, I think it's just part of who I am and part of who my family was. I still have my 5 brothers. They have big families and we all stay kind of close together, but we lost our parents some years ago. So that's kind of, I guess, the basis.
Did in that background, 2 questions that come out of a sort of a fraught immigrant background from a war-torn country. First of all, your parents went to the South, which might not have been the easiest place to go if you're from Lebanon and or a Roman Catholic in a very Protestant Southern Baptist oriented kind of part of the country. Did you ever run into any of that in the sense of where are you all from and why do you do all these weird things and all that kind of baggage?
Yeah, my parents were pretty incredible in the way that they raised us to, I don't even know how they did it, but they were so grounded in letting things roll off your shoulders and just, stay focused on who we are and what we do. But my mom was very private. She didn't want us talking about us, where we came from. Don't talk about your family because you don't know how people are thinking. And, my dad was more like, don't worry about it. You are who you are and you're a good, we do what we do and we do good things. And I think the small community was helpful because there were a group of Lebanese people that settled in New Bern, North Carolina. It was a big, community. And then my other relatives were in Detroit, which was also a very large community of Lebanese people. Lebanon was part of our discussion every day. I mean, it was just, my grandmother was from there. So she was, half speaking Arabic and half speaking English, would tell us stories all the time. So I think we were very cognizant of the fractions, and we were very, I was, in the 70s, even in school as older, watching my dad and my aunts work to be able to communicate with relatives during the, times that were really war and bombing. And, we had family members there, and my aunt ran a college and was working very hard to get kids out of into college over here and, try to help bring, people over. So I think it was, I never felt, it was probably there. I just never let it affect me necessarily. Other than the dark hair and the big nose, always got jokes about the dark hair.
Well, in terms of the Lebanese community, did you find people from other backgrounds in Lebanon who in Lebanon weren't getting on so well in the Civil War, or was it mostly from the Roman Catholic community that that you guys, that your greater Lebanese community in that area came from?
For the most part, we were, from what I knew, the Catholic community. We were, again, my mom's, very cautious about sharing your religion because it wasn't, not everybody believed the way we did in this country. But even if we were with Muslims or other religions, it was not a problem from my standpoint. I never felt like I was being targeted or, something, we just not in agreement. It was an open discussion. I felt more sometimes targeted as a Catholic by maybe the Baptist community or other religions than I did, others. So, anyway, so that, yes, that it's, I think we were in a generation where we were coming out of being able to be a little more of ourselves, but we're at the line of it. So my parents were very, cautious. And
growing up, were you kind of aware of the problems in Lebanon in terms of the civil war? I mean, how much anguish did what was going on in the quote unquote old country bleed into your family experience and with your parents, your grandmother and so forth? I mean, you must have felt that because you are growing up. I mean, I'm assuming that you were sort of a child during some of the trouble that was happening, and that must have in some way affected how you see the world even up to today.
It does. I mean, I still was young, but in the 70s, before I was in, I think, high school, junior high and high school, mostly like junior high. And my aunt, when she was bringing kids over, my dad would bring them into our house. And on Sundays was the only time that was a ceasefire where they could try to call and have communication with family members.
Yes.
That just, certainly it stays with you. And it's sad. I mean, you certainly, you can't help but when you look at today and look at all that we've learned, and then look back and say, why is it that we're still here?
Yeah, and the thing is too, it gives you a perspective growing up, I imagine, that lets you know pretty early that life is not going to be perfect and is going to be a bit of a struggle.
Yeah, and the funny thing about that is my dad always said, you can do anything. A Williams can do anything. His Lebanese name was Milchelm, and he had to, I guess his father changed it when he came over because he couldn't understand what he was saying. So they had to pick a name, but it was always a Williams can do anything. And they're like, the older you get, you realize, well, that's not necessarily true, Dad.
Yes. It works in Disney movies where the princess is singing, be anything, be anybody, but in real life, maybe not. Hey, so let me turn the page a little bit here before I get to your book. Which, by the way, when did All That I Am, Now That I Know, Exploring Women Entrepreneurship, when was it published?
In 2018.
Yeah, I could look it up, but I just didn't have that. What are you doing? Okay, so what is your day job and how does it fit in with artificial intelligence and decision making? How would you describe what you do? That's where I want to start. So
I have a company called Plaza Bridge Group, which I founded, and my husband's now part of and has been for many years. But it's innovation consultancy and development. So we go into companies and help them with growth strategies. Not, it may be that, it's helping them with growth and revenue growth, right? And most of the time that's leveraging, what is your future going to look like? What products do you need to have to be able to stay alive and sustainable in the future? And how do we help you get there? And what processes and culture do you have to even innovate new products and ideas? Technology, because I grew up in technology for the most part, more on the sales and marketing side, but later on being able to work with developers and understanding the development side and understanding the technologies, sort of nuances. And the importance of that in organizations, it really has become this, how do we help companies understand technology and its place in their new product strategies or their innovation and what it's going to do to their futures and the future of the company. So that is just more been a personal passion of mine. I love, making sure that I'm staying sort of as far ahead of the curve as I can on what's going on in technology and how it might impact us in the future. And, future thinking, I'm a very big component of future thinking and planning. But that's what our day job is. That's what my work is.
In view of that, do you have more contact than most people might with other women, given that I met you through the WBC, who like Gabriella Schuster, who I interviewed from the other day from Microsoft? There are some women in the tech end of things. Often, if they're in a bigger company, they're not specifically in the most tech science oriented part, but nevertheless, there's very few women out there. Has your interest introduced you to women in the field on the science side of tech innovation besides, say, the marketing side? Well,
I landed in tech because I loved the future. I loved what was happening more in product. It wasn't always technology, but technologies was it. That's the flavor, right? that drive led me to working with startups and doing some very cool things. And yeah, I was, one of few women with an Indian partner, co-founder, to get funded. So, the interesting thing is going after some of these roles, in the mentoring world of, if for example, we have a very strong friend who was my investor 30 years ago. The one person, and I joke with him about it, like, he would introduce men founders to men. But when I came in, he wanted me to meet the one woman founder. It was only one that had ever been invested in. And I was the second one. So I was like, well, why wouldn't you? Eventually we did. We had these discussions. It's like, well, I want to meet the other guys too. It's like, I'm not just a woman. So let's look at the founders and put me out. And I sought it out. It wasn't necessarily easy. And then you hit the top ranks of a company, because I was an executive at a company that went IPO. It was all men in the beginning. And, slowly and I will say the CEO was very cognizant of bringing women on because he wanted a diversified organization. So I've been fortunate maybe in that regard. And I always sought it out. IBM was always much more diversified, working with some of the technology companies. Maybe not at the most senior ranks, but you could see the evolution. And I think the mindsets of a lot of my peers as we got together in technology was really just, let's not let anything stop us. Let's band together. And that's the beauty of the organizations today.
Do you go into some of that in the book in terms of woman entrepreneurship? Does it have would you describe that as a book with a sort of a more tech savvy angle because of your own interests, or is it just generally across the board? And the second thing, I would ask on that is, in terms of your own experiences in the world of business per se, tech in particular, have you run into some of the roadblocks of the kind of what you read about on the whole bro culture thing and that sort of masculine hubris that is not per se misogynistic all the time, but basically looks at the world through a kind of an acquisitive lens rather than one of cooperation, in a way that I think excludes good leadership, period, which in my book excludes women, because I think women are wonderful leaders, and real leading is, in a way, the power of giving away power, to quote my friend Matthew Barzan, who was Obama's ambassador to the UK, who's written this book called The Power of Giving Away Power. It's so interesting because it's by a man who worked with Obama to develop the small donor method that made Obama president, and really mirrors what I think is a more feminine style of leadership. I hate to use those words, but in the sense that it's not this chest thumping, it's all about me stuff. And of course, real leadership is cooperation and delegation. And I think women know how to do that very well. But anyway, in your book, all that I know now that I know, all that I am now that I know, Exploring Women Entrepreneur. Let's go back to that and just talk about how you wrote that, why you wrote it, and does it shed some light on this whole question of women entrepreneurship in tech or science-oriented fields?
Well, yes, in some ways, but I wanted it to be much more broad and impact, especially young professional women. I have a daughter who's in her early 30s, and, looking at the challenges they have, again, today, which in some cases I think is almost worse than what I had growing up into the world of startup. And
stop there for a minute and tell me how you think it's almost worse. That's such an interesting statement.
I think we went
I don't want to breeze by that.
Yeah, I think the money does funny things to people. I think the more success, and especially in the Silicon Valley, which she was in California, the monies that equate of money and power, which has been predominantly a male thing. I think it's created an even stronger bro culture, which in some ways, I don't mean this, it was almost like a permission to use people in certain ways, and women being the thing that they wanted to use. They had money and power. Some women allow it to happen. Some women are savvy enough also to figure out how to use that to get where they want to go. And I don't disparage any of it. I'm just saying there's these different aspects of things that are happening. It was hard for me, sure. I mean, I think, again, it's all about mindset, and it's like you have to barrel through it. And did it keep me from doing things that I really thought I wanted to do? I think in some regards, I pulled back, and I talk about that in my book. It's like when I was asked who's going to be the CEO of this particular startup, and I'm the one getting the money, and I'm the one sitting here doing all the work. And I knew what he was really asking, but I didn't answer the question. I'm like, I don't know. When he wanted me to say, I'm going to take it. It's, what are we doing as women to hold ourselves back that maybe we don't even recognize when we could step up?
But this brings up a question I'd like to ask you just one-on-one here, irrespective of what you say in your book. And that is that, it seems to me sometimes women are so right about things, but are tempted to play by the rules that they are handed as the price of admission, instead of saying, hey, there's a better way to do this whole thing. And that comes in the area of work-family balance. It comes in the area of parental leave. It comes in the area of pay equity, but it also comes just in accepting this culture, say the bro culture, to give it that name. When you think of this sort of idea, move fast and break things, and disruption being glorified for its own sake, a woman leader, for instance, the Prime Minister of New Zealand would say, well, but what happens to everybody else? And where is the virtue of upsetting the entire social apple cart so that you can chest thump and say, hey, we have this bright new idea. How about we bring everybody along with us to the next step? And that's real leadership. Whereas this kind of self-centered business model, kind of Ayn Randian, ideal of the powerful male, move fast, break things, to hell with everybody else. It seems that, women are not going to get very far in that world, not because only they're women, but they're actually smarter than that.
But don't
and
want
they have to pretend they're not to succeed.
Agree. I didn't want that. I focus on innovation for good. And the investment community, it's all tied together. The investment community must have returns, and they must have returns in a certain time frame. And they're going to go to the entrepreneurs that have shown over and over again that they can do that. Or they're going to choose those entrepreneurs that are founders that seemingly they think they can get enough cranks out of to make their money back at some point in time. So there's always the look of a return. And it certainly does force faster, get things out there, disrupt. And I love disruptive technology. But what we don't do, and what I think sometimes at the cost of men or women, if it's a cost, the cost is we're not thinking about or anticipating what's the downside of putting AI into a robot that's going to take over this role and start to do my facial recognition and sense every emotion in my body. What's the downside? Why are we not planning for that? And we just haven't done that. Otherwise, we wouldn't be having cybersecurity issues that we have today. We'd be thinking about the hacking and the things ahead of time and trying to put those guards in. I think women do think more about it, but we've had the affordability to be able to think more about it when we're not being pushed for a number or a return.
Yeah, in the last couple of WBC meetings that I've been watching online about women in business and so forth and so on, it seems to me that some of the numbers are actually moving in the wrong direction. When you look at the statistical studies that are being done by some of the women, in terms of the number of women not only in tech, but pay equity, and also the number of women who have dropped out altogether in the aftermath of COVID. But then there's sort of nuanced debates as well of a lot of men and women who would rather work from home more, but then they suffer in their job because they're not taken quite as seriously because they're not showing up in the office all the time. It seems right now that, someone who's written a book on women entrepreneurship, my guess is that your radar is pretty intensely focused on where we are in terms of navigating the return to work, if you want to put it that way, or the great resignation, if you flip it, post COVID, because I think all the cards are on the table now in a way that in my lifetime, I'm 70, I've never lived in a period of history where more seems to be up in the air, and where a lot of, you do not know how so many different stories are going to end now. And I think women's entrepreneurship is one of them, amongst others, because of all this refiguring. I mean, how are you seeing things right now yourself, just in the sort of broad sweep of life in general, but women entrepreneurship in particular. Your book came out a couple of years ago. Okay, a lot's changed since then.
Yep. Well, I mean, it's a big question. There are a number of things, right? I think there's more savvy around women and what they need to do to access money.
Mm-hmm.
I think there was a dearth of, every entrepreneur, I don't know how much you've been in it, but, I spent years coaching and advising entrepreneurs as part of organizations, 500 entrepreneurs, men and women. And, having the savvy to know what you need in order to be able to get a VC or an investor to say yes, it's just not there. The education has changed a lot, and there's much more to help women and men understand what you need to be credible to an investor. And I think that's going to help. The money buckets, they always are looking for the experience. They're always looking for the confidence. And I talk a lot to women about being competent and confidence in front and trying to understand what they're saying between the lines, so they don't get caught into, what you think they're saying, because it's too easy. And I think that more of that needs to be done for women. Men barrel through it. I mean, I see it.
Let me go back to a point I made earlier, because I want you to talk about this more, because I know you bring a lot to the table on this issue. This idea that, looking for permission to be taken seriously in that arena, sometimes the arena itself and its values have to be challenged, rather than saying, well, let me explain the rules of this game to you. It's a stupid game. Men aren't happy either. I'll just give you one example from my daughter, who's a CEO of a company in New York, a green energy investment company. And she was saying that one of the things that changed after COVID was that, she would not try to hide the fact that her biggest interest in life was her kids, even though she's very successful.
Sure.
And why? Because she was doing Zoom calls like the one we're on right now, where you were talking about your husband running through, where a toddler runs through a president of a bank that she's talking with in a meeting, and he's saying, I got to be quiet because I just put my 2-year-old down for a nap. Well, all of a sudden now we have permission to be people and don't have to pretend that we're 100% focused, serious woman. I'm right in there with the guys. The guys were kind of putting on a show too. So somebody's got to finally say, hey, this emperor has no clothes. And it's just ridiculous. We have to pretend we don't have lives we care about as caregivers, as whole people. I mean, how do you relate to that?
Do you remember 9/11?
Yeah.
We became human again.
Yeah.
2008, we became human again. Right now, we are kind of in that we're still human, although money is pouring into startups and all kinds of things.
Yeah.
My hope is we don't lose that. How do we keep this humanistic? Because as we tend to forget very easily and go back into this unnatural norm. So I think the pieces of the puzzle that are seemingly for me coming together that I can see are more women's organizations, more advocacy for every inclusive culture. I think those things are really important. And then, more money sources and more education to help from early stages. The colleges are trying to be more focused on this. I mean, I teach an innovation and product management course for a university here locally and just started that, but it's to bring real world. And we talk about these issues. I think you have to bring it to the younger generation so it grows up. But
what do you see the younger generation doing and reacting to you bringing these up? That's not a rhetorical question. I'd really like to know, what are you discovering in these classes you're teaching and/or with younger women or men about their attitude towards trying to have a whole life, combine romantic and family interests and other interests with this hard driving, I'm all about business, I'll show up on the weekend stuff?
Yeah, it's interesting because, and I'll parallel it with, and I don't remember the year, but I spoke to a number of women MBA students at Duke University some years ago. And now I think I was maybe even still at Red Hat at the time working. And the question was, how do you do this with a daughter? How do you do what you do and have a child? And the concern was that. And, and I did it, and we share some strategies there. Today it's almost a little more in the Z, the generation that is in college now and be graduating because they're all seniors. I don't hear family concerns. I don't hear work. They're going to figure out how to have it. They want it. They want a healthy community. They want a green community. They're focused on privacy is a very big concern. They want to be able to kind of have their time, and they feel like, the work environments today are opening up for remote work and opportunities, and they could do their own thing for entrepreneurship. And I see the equal, sort of thinking there, men and women. But the thing is, when I hear what they're most concerned about, it's interesting that privacy comes up as number one. But then when I ask them, are you on TikTok? And then all the hands go up. And
Sure.
it's like, well, it's the education of what does this mean when you're saying these things?
Yeah.
But I don't know if I answered your question directly.
Well, yeah, you did. And you bring up an interesting segue to something I wanted to ask anyway. And that is, if you're talking about AI, artificial intelligence, and the whole development of that, it seems to me that one of the ironies is that this kind of free entrepreneurial spirit that has produced such a tech revolution in the US is often now being put at the service of authoritarian, totalitarian regimes worldwide that are using these things, whether it is, using Israeli developed technology to track down some poor Saudi or, Bahraini princess somewhere so she can be returned home because she wanted to live in London, and or facial recognition technology being used by the Chinese Communist Party, and or cell phone technology being used that you have to dial in all the time to show that you're a good party member. It seems that the idealism of the tech community was misplaced in so many ways. And you look at a lot of the stuff that came out of Facebook, and the whistleblower, who happened to be a woman, I think inevitably was a woman, who talked about the misuse and directing towards children and so on. But more than that, there's a kind of an optimism that almost pretends as if the world no longer has some really bad actors, which make every single thing we invent a two-edged sword. And do you run into people really thinking about this? Like, okay, I'm inventing this so Walmart can keep track of license plates in their parking lot. I'm just making shit up here.
Yeah.
But what it's actually going to be used for is the government of North Korea to prevent anybody from ever escaping. I mean, to use a dramatic whatever. Does anybody in the AI community, as you see it being developed, says, look, what are we unleashing here?
There is a contention of people. I think Elon Musk is actually a leader in this. That I think I'm going to forget the organization, but maybe the AI Efficacy Association or something of that sort.
Yeah,
they're not enough. It's not global enough. There are countries that don't care, and so they're not ever going to get behind it.
Yeah.
So we do have a little bit of a monster. The universities, MIT's working on things. It was an afterthought. It's not a forethought, and that's always the problem. Social media, all the good things it could do. It's great, that's forethought, but we didn't put forethought into what if it gets out of control? How do you get this monster of misinformation back in the box?
Yes.
And the best way you can do all of this is educating people on being much more savvy interpreters of news, and doing their homework and reading multiple sites and making sure they're not getting caught up in, sound bites, because that soundbite might not be real. You've got to go find articles. Yes. But yet there are people that do care, and there are organizations that, and people like myself that try to write to bring up, the issues at hand, but not enough. I would just say.
When you look at the use of AI on a positive side, my producer Ernie just sent me a little message in the chat section, which I think is an interesting question about artificial intelligence addressing climate crisis, and whether you are running into people in terms of who you are coaching in entrepreneurial startups, and or people in AI, or your studies of AI generally. Does some of this give you personally, you, Teresa Spangler, a sense of optimism, saying, yes, it looks really bad, but all sorts of things are coming, and we have all these smart people working on all this stuff, and we've got AI, and we can figure it out, and carbon reduction, et cetera, et cetera. Is there any kind of sense that there are things happening that are going to give us a little more of an edge on what seem like very intractable problems right now?
Absolutely. I mean, the amount of innovation going on, I mean, we always need more, right? It was always a complaint that we don't have enough innovation, but we have a lot of innovation. We have a lot of people working on a lot of really, really big problems, and a lot
such as give us some examples.
Well, so the Institute of the Future, if you know, I forget Jane's last name, I think it's Jane McGowan, who has a book called Imaginable. I think she's somebody you should interview, but she's got a whole site focused on helping people to, anticipate the future and think scenarios around negative effects of what could happen. Mm-hmm. If you're planning that way and you've got enough people, there's a coaching group called Positive Intelligence. The Shahzad, the gentleman that has founded that, has given away the program to thousands of coaches trying to increase the good things, good people coming together and spreading, this sort of goodness, and how to change the dialogue from yes, but to yes, and so I think there are organizations, there are people that care. There's a lot of innovation going on. AI and in climate change. My daughter is an ESG, environmental sustainability and governance consultant. AI platforms that measure carbon footprint and help companies. One of the things is, if you're not aware that you're to the level of what you're polluting, how can you fix it? And AI give the metrics and the analytics and all the detail around what you can predict will be incredibly helpful, I think, in that. And then there's, carbon reduction, things that are, who knew moss could suck out the carbon of, right? So we're learning these things. The question is, are we doing it fast enough? Can we
ramp up quick enough to make a difference before our little cataclysm? Go back a minute and just mention the person who was talking about what we can imagine. And you said you should interview her. We get a lot of good podcast interviews because someone like you either introduces us to somebody or knows them. Do you know her?
I don't know her personally. I'm part of her cohort program that is a recent, I'm certified in all of her futures thinking programs. The book, if you look at the book Imaginable, it just came out actually today. And I'm in a new program that is, she selected, I don't know how many people, but there's hundreds of us, people to come in and just start to gain more insights on how she does her things. And so
our producer Ernie will look up Imaginable and get in touch with the publisher, who will be very interested in booking her, because publishers love to have authors interviewed when books are just being released. So we have a good intro there. If Ernie will do that, that sounds like a great interview. So thank you for that heads up. Let me just remind people.
I just want to make a point that to the points that you're asking about, that's how we maybe can conquer and bring the good things to light, because we need more of us out there in concert doing these things. Can't do it alone. We can make little steps alone, but we can do it better in groups.
I want to get back to you with another question in a minute, but I'm going to do a little ID thing here for folks who are listening to this podcast or watching it live on Facebook or seeing the recording of it on YouTube or Facebook and all the other interweb platforms we are on. My name is Frank Schaeffer. This is In Conversation with Frank Schaeffer. We will have links to Teresa Spangler and anything she wants us to link to, including her book and a place to get that on Amazon or any place she would like us to link to. So you don't have to go searching all around for all that I am now that I know. And the other thing that I would mention is that if you like this podcast in the sense of enjoying it, please also like it in the online sense and spread the word. so that we can increase our audience for a wonderful interview like this with Teresa. Okay, that said, Teresa, talk a little bit about the history of your consulting work. You say you were working with your husband. Is this a company you started? Is he now working for you? Do you employ him? What sort of an outfit is this? What do you do day to day? You were talking about teaching, and I know you're an author. What is consulting about? Is it you? Is it a company? Is it lots of people? Is it a network? Tell me about it.
Yeah, so I left Red Hat in 2002 and started an innovation company at that time. So I started early on, and in that, I've just done so many different things in and out of various organizations of all sizes, large and small. But I started it because innovation was being squeezed out after 9/11. We cut marketing, we cut innovation, we cut new product, we cut things back, understandably so. So everybody was cost control, regardless of the size of the company. And the importance of innovating in times where it's challenging was just really important to me. And I wanted to bring that back in. How do you do that while you're trying to keep the day-to-day numbers up? So that was my focus. In 2000, and that was called Creative Leadership Adventures. I worked with Coca-Cola and, Home Depot and the Tom Peters company. It's just so many different companies. And then my husband, who's also a brilliant innovator and thinker and very good at what he does and new products as well. And so we decided to bring ourselves together, and he joined me in 2009. And so we've been, a partnership. He would say he works for me. I would say we're equal partners, although I have majority ownership of the company, but we're married and we equally own it. So, we bring different things to the table, and we've worked with some incredible companies. So we love the work that we do, but this entrepreneurial, because we work with Fortune companies a lot of the time. And then we also work with companies that are mid and small, and we're trying to help them scale growth. And that's been a lot of our work over all these years. But our passion is entrepreneurship. This is how we grew up, both of us. He worked at
international or primarily U.S. companies?
So I would say the headquarters have been primarily U.S.-based companies, although we've done a lot of international work. We have worked with international companies. I actually worked with a Norwegian software company and helped them to sell it. To put working with the board of directors to get it sold. So we've done a lot of different things around the world, predominantly Europe and the US, North America, Canada. We have clients in Canada. But we're always kind of pulled back to in helping startups. And we'll do that a lot of times just we give our time away. We'll just sit and listen. And we have some ways that we do that and try to help them think through what it's going to take to either grow the business or get money or whatever, they are trying to do. And even more, the viability of the idea.
How many companies at any given time are you working with?
So because we stay small, no more than about 12. We're probably working with 7, 8 right now and teaching.
So now when you say you stay small, so basically it's you and your husband, you have a staff in an office somewhere, or are you working?
Yeah, we used to have a staff. We don't have a staff anymore. 2008, we went to 100% contractors. We have a really large contract base.
What's that mean? Just explain that for people who are not familiar with that.
Partnerships with development companies that know how to do technology development. We used to have some of our own people that did that, but now we have partnerships that we trust that we use.
And how many partnerships would that be? And how many people?
More than 50. And so we might have like 3 or 4 or 5 development firms that we use. We might have, a number of individual contractors that we could bring in at any given time to supplement work that we might need to put somebody on site, or it's a very intensive project. So we'll bring on 2 or 3 contractors to work.
And start to finish, what would be the ideal time frame in the sense of what do you bring to the table? Somebody gets in touch with you, says they need help, and you bring all this with you and the contractors, and you do your thing. And how long are you involved with? And in the best of all worlds, what do you take them from what to what?
Yeah, so our average tenure has been 3.5 years, 3.8 years, somewhere in there.
It's a long relationship.
It is. But, when we go in, we're starting with, it's kind of peeling the onion back, right? It's like, let's identify what we need to do initially. and what the goal is. In one case is how do we, what is the value of the data that we have? We're answering that one question. Well, to answer that one question, it takes 3 to 4 months of diving deeply into the kind of data. Where does it all sit? How is it organized? But that will lead us into, because this is an innovation project, as to what could we do technically with that data? And then how do we protect the individuals that data is coming from? How do you anonymize it? What do you do with it? And so we're inventing product that potentially could monetize that data. And eventually, because if we're doing our job well, we earn credibility and trust. We are the ones helping them design the products and then helping to commercialize and get those first customers. So it's a cycle. We can step into any part of that and do smaller engagements, 6 to 9 months, a year. But for the most part, we're in for multiple years.
Where have you been able to influence, if at all? I'm not implying you should have. I'm just curious, with your interest in female entrepreneurship and leadership in this area, and your association with Edie and the WBC and these other folks, how much are you able to tilt things in a direction which perhaps even subtly makes a difference to the fortunes of future, not just women entrepreneurs coming in, but the kind of way a company behaves with their women employees or giving opportunities and these other things? Just talk about that for a minute.
So one, I have a lot of women that I bring to the table that work with me, in
these contractors.
They'll come in. I'll bring them into the projects. I think the second way, and I work with a lot of women. So it is, it has been a lot of women in senior positions. We're in especially if you're familiar with Raleigh, Durham,
sure,
there's a lot of biotech and pharma in that region. A lot of women have done very well in that industry.
Have they done well in the HR kind of part, or are they doing well in the science?
Founders, startups, chief marketing officers,
good.
senior
That's
roles,
encouraging.
product. Yeah.
Any reason why the Raleigh-Durham area has been good for that?
It started because I think the 3 universities have a very strong science basis.
Okay.
But GlaxoSmithKline was headquartered there for some time. Sure. We had larger biotech companies that were headquartered there. They organized the Biotech Center, which was something that really was a foundation to bring and encourage and recruit more biotech companies in. Yeah, so that was strong. The entrepreneurship for tech was also strong because the universities are strong in tech in the region. So we have, we had IBM there. We had every kind of major tech and telecom company in the area. So it fostered a lot of good opportunities. I would say for women more on the biotech, tech, not so much. I was one of few women, and there was, it has grown over time and it's gotten a lot stronger. But still, we have a lot to catch up on.
Well, also it's an area of the country people were it was easy to stay in once you've been in school there, maybe find a job, kind of like where I live up near Boston. We have a lot of people who come to school in the Boston area and then stick around and work for the companies here. It's a kind of circular thing. Are you an optimist in terms of your own kind of work that more women are getting involved? I mean, here you are successful running this consultancy company. Speaking of which, what's been the reaction to your book so far? Who did you write it for? I mean, in hindsight, what kind of people are reading it, benefiting from it, getting back to you saying, we read this or we're using it within our company or whatever? How has that all worked for you in terms of just author to author here? I'm curious how your book has worked for you.
Well, I probably worked more for the book than the book has worked for me.
Yes, I get that too. Believe me.
Yeah. No, I didn't write it for that. I wanted to help people, but it was a way for me to kind of put down things that I've been through to help people feel like they're not alone. And maybe maybe you won't make some of the same mistakes, or you won't have to deal with some of the things I had to. That was my main motivation. But I mean, it's just kind of silly, but when I talk about a book, I forget to mention that I'm the author. So I might, it's just the way I am. It's like,
I get that.
Right. But I would say, I have a lot of friends that shared the book and they wrote it and got a lot of feedback. I had a very close male entrepreneur that is now worth a couple $100 million. that wanted to read the book. And I was just laughing at why he would even want to read it. And he read it, and then he sent me a picture of him reading it. And then he wrote me this incredible, what a great, story to be telling. And he's got 4 daughters. So he I think it's the men with daughters start to realize the things that I've been through that are close to me, and they want. I just lost a very dear friend who has 3 beautiful daughters, and he made sure before he left that I was very close to his daughters. They all got a copy of the book, and they, it warms my heart. If it helps you with one thing, I've done what I could. I was motivated to write it because there, I worked with a number of women, and sometimes the way that they're trying to make things happen is a little harsh, and it becomes sometimes too harsh, and it works against them. And so I really wanted to help women feel like there's other ways to do this. Let's get.
When you talk about that, let me stop you there for a minute. When you say it becomes too harsh, give me an example of what you're talking about.
They get angry and yell and, stomp their feet and make food, intimidate, more lead by intimidation, and not even realizing sometimes that they're doing it. And it's not just one woman, it's multiple. And men do that. I mean, it's like everybody, right? We all have our time. But I found it to be something that didn't feel natural to them. They wanted to change. So it's like, well, if you're feeling that way, there's probably others feeling that way. So how do we come back to who are we really as a woman? And let's get back to this natural, empathetic, and make sure that we have empathy with people, that we're connecting and engaging and, thinking about people, which is all part of really stuff that's important to me. But I find it being important to women sometimes when they feel out of sorts, they feel disconnected. They feel
and you look for male allies who get it.
Yes. Yeah.
I mean, that's helpful. That's, and I always wrap up these, I'm not quite wrapping it up yet, but I talk about this book I've written called Fall in Love, Have Children, Stay Put, Save the Planet, Be Happy. It sounds like a very conservative title for, I'm married, I have children and grandchildren, but really I'm talking about fall in love with the concept of love rather than the concept of success as we define it by job title. Have children in the sense we're all caregivers. Like today, you're taking care of me because you're on my podcast, and I'm taking care of you because I'm talking about your book. In other words, my relationship with you right now is like the same I have with my granddaughters when they do something and I stick it up on the refrigerator. I'm saying, hey, look, she wrote a book. And stay put, don't always move to the better place in the sense of physically chase money all the time or position, but realize that community means something. And then, of course, save the planet by not being always after the most acquisitive thing. And then be happy is very ironic because, as you know, I know this, because you're a wise person. The more we try to be happy, the less happy we are. The more we make those around us happy, the happier we get. And there's science to back all that up. So having written this book that seems to have struck a chord with a lot of women who have read it, I feel very connected to people who are trying to help people have a more complete approach. And also to women saying, be confident, keep your chin up. Don't imitate these idiot men who have blown their own lives by not having a whole life. Insist that you are a whole person, have some courage here and help men too, because there's a lot of guys out there, for instance, not taking parental leave because they think it'll make their career look less serious. And everybody has to be the first one out and essentially say, hey, listen, I'm going to take advantage of this, or I'm going to demand childcare that this company helps provide that, whatever it may be. It just seems we're at a point now where without some male allies who get it, who help with childcare personally, do the dishes. My friend Aaron tells me the sexiest thing in the world is to watch a husband unloading the dishwasher. I mean, I know funny as this sounds, it's all real stuff. And I think too often we just don't talk about it.
I wouldn't be able to do any of this without my husband. I mean,
there you are.
Yeah, very, very much a support my entire career. I mean,
and my daughter says how on her CV now, people ask her about her history and how she became a CEO and all the rest of it. And in the old days, she said it was all business. And now she's very upfront. She says, I learned more from being a mom and raising 2 children than I did from any of the stuff in the business world. In fact, when I apply those rules of conflict resolution and how to get along and caregiving and priorities, that's why I'm successful in business. So she's even gone the next step. and talks openly about her experiences as a mother and a spouse. So I don't know what you feel about that.
Yeah, when I first started working, on my own, I started the company, because I did do a lot of coaching in the beginning. Men wanted this. You're right. Men wanted the same thing. So it's not a necessarily always male, female thing. I mean, we all need some kind of support, or we all want that mentorship. We all want to have our voices heard, which is the biggest component of this. So I think, it's how do we pay attention to the universe of need, but also look at where the disparate areas are. How do we get women and raise them up? Because I do believe they'll help raise other people up.
Oh, I think in that sense, feminism, in the best sense of the word, is an evolutionary step. It actually has to do with our survival, because unless we start being more caregiving, we're done.
Yeah,
I mean, as a species. And, I think there's a lot of men like me who secretly, and now I'm not so secretly because I've written about it and I've been doing childcare for my 3 youngest grandchildren for the last 13 years. And I don't mean my wife's been doing it and I help out. I mean, I'm doing it with her, and now more me than her. I think there's a lot of men who are relieved to be able to have women open a door for them to actually be better human beings too.
I agree. I totally agree with that.
I mean, it's such a relief to have that approach. It's why I've had a woman primary care physician for the last 25 years, because I don't have to be this big, tough, stupid idiot who comes in and says, I'm feeling fine.
Yeah.
With this guy, I can be with a sympathetic human being who doesn't mind that I'm weak sometimes or scared sometimes.
But, and that is the power of vulnerability.
Women give men permission to be better men,
Yeah, I totally agree. I mean, when you're vulnerable, you're allowing me to be a little more vulnerable as well. And then we open up and we get to know each other, really. It's not the surface stuff.
Yeah, it's funny, I mean, this is more information than you need, but like, I find it easier to talk about, say, an enlarged prostate and the fact I have to get up at night and pee 3 times sometimes with my woman physician than I do with a guy when I'm trying to do this macho guy thing of me, I don't have problems. In other words, I get better medical care because I'm more actually myself as a male. I'm putting this all wrong and it's a weird example, but I'm trying to make a point that women leadership in business is a relief. It's a relief for a man to work with someone who cares about him as a whole person.
Right. I totally agree. The more that, we open up to people, it really is kind of the emotional intelligence.
Yes.
If we're a little more emotionally connected to people, we have the opportunity to have healthy dialogue. We can disagree, but we can have a healthy dialogue around it.
Yeah, and women seem more aware too of connection on every level of just, hey, the whole planet's connected. Get with the program.
Yeah.
You're not this big, brave individual anymore. If you can't learn how to cooperate and get on with somebody or whatever field you're in. And I'm sure, let's finish this up, but let's talk just for a minute about in the counseling you do to corporations and individuals who are doing startups. What are some of the points you give in terms of just behavior that is successful? How do you advise them to treat other people?
So we lead by example, right? But a lot of our work is doing, because we have to actually do the work. Like we're discovering, we're coming up with ideas, but the work that I have to do is helping to influence others on how to influence their teams and to be respectful of the feedback that they're getting. And so it's a little more mentorship in the pure consulting work. And coaching, we can dive into it and give examples and work on it, deeply work on how to open that up. In the consulting world, it's being savvy to the individuals in the room, because you could have different personalities and everybody dealing with something very drastically different in the room that has nothing to do with work. And so if we're not careful, we disengage them all because they're so head into, well, my child is sick, or, my mom has COVID. I mean, today especially. So it's being very sensitive to the room and the environment, and asking good questions like, well, how are we all feeling? Anything personally going on that we need to know about that we can help you, kind of bring this to, even if it's a time crunch, let's try to get to it and we'll help you as much as we can, roll up the sleeves. But if we're influencing, for example, sometimes change is very difficult. It's just not dumping on change one at a time. It's building a soft transition into a new world, especially if you're a traditional company and you're trying to move to a, more technically advanced, you're going to have technology products and you don't have teams that understand the technology. We train them on the technology. We try to help educate them on what does this mean for you? What kind of skills are you going to need? How can we help you get those skills? What can we recommend to make sure that we're building that skill base around to be successful with this product and not risk your job, right? The people are so worried they're going to lose their jobs. Our job is can we make you feel safe in this environment and show you what you can learn to help you learn how to be able to be supportive of this technology that's going out the door.
Yeah, that's a wonderful place to end. So Teresa Spangler, my guest, this is Frank Schaeffer on In Conversation with Frank Schaeffer. My new book is, if I can remember the title, Fall in Love, Have Children, Stay Put, Save the Planet, Be Happy. Teresa's book that we've been talking about is All That I Know Now That I...
All That I Am Now That I Know.
It's All That I Am Now That I Know. I did screw up my own title first. So this is, you can see I'm not picking on you. And it's exploring women entrepreneurship by someone who really knows what she's saying and has done it. So I would just say, if you have the least interest in women and entrepreneurship and business, you need to be very aware of Teresa and buy her book and read it. And then we will link to the book so people can do that with a click. We will also link to you, Teresa, for anybody who has questions.
Right.
And if you want to share this once we post it, that would be great, because I think anybody who knows and loves you will like this interview. You come across as a wonderful person, and it's been great to become a little more of your friend here today. So thank you so much for being with us. And another shout out to the Women's Business Collaborative for being the venue where I met you, as it were, online. And so thanks, Teresa. This has been great. Really, really, really wonderful conversation.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for having me. It's been fun.
My pleasure. Thank you. Okay, bye-bye.
Bye.